Welcome back to Cap Review. We're here with Representative Abigail Spanberger, and you're already making headway this year. President Biden signed one of your bills into law. That's the Computers for Veterans and Student Act. You actually introduced this back in 2020. Tell us more about what's in it.
So this is a really straightforward piece of legislation that came about from conversations with a nonprofit within the 7th District focused on training veterans who have left military service looking to kind of pivot into the technology space, but also focused on ensuring that veterans are connected to the opportunities that exist. And what I realized and what I found out through my engagement with this particular nonprofit is that there are many organizations that may want to donate computers to these types of refurbishers, to programs that also then donate computers to veterans. But one of the entities that can't do that is the federal government. And because there are rules prohibiting kind of the onward donation of excess materials, including computers. But, you know, in our office or in agencies across the government, you know, they'll cycle through computers. You need a certain speed. You need a certain capacity.
The newest one.
You want the newest one. But there's still, if you are a veteran who, you know, might be resource constrained and are looking to be able to get on the internet so that you can be applying for jobs or stay connected with your kid's school or do any of the sort of day-to-day things that people do with home computers, that is a real area of opportunity.
So, you know, talking about veterans, of course, national security is top of mind right now. We've seen so many varying levels of instability and just threats in different parts of the world. You're also on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So what would you like to see done? I understand you're also a former federal law enforcement officer, a former intelligence officer. So your experience, of course, is valuable in what you bring to the Foreign Affairs Committee. So
on the Foreign Affairs Committee, we have, you know, a broad scope of issues. We have been very, very engaged on what continues to be occurring, the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But that means that we also have to stay focused on other threats that exist other places. Certainly that one is in the news the most. But what we have seen in Iran, be it the uprising of students and young people against the regime, but also the threats that the regime continues to pose towards the United States and our allies in the region. Certainly when we're looking at kind of an ever-growing influence of the Chinese Communist Party and China's influence within the world, making sure that our policy, our foreign policy is upholding American values, is strengthening our diplomatic core and our ability to really have an important global presence of leadership focused on, you know, strengthening democracies, focused on strengthening our relationships with partners throughout the world. Like, those are different elements of what that committee can do and does continue to do. And a lot of people may not know about your background in the CIA. You actually have a lot of experience working in narcotics trafficking cases. I mean, what a career switch up. Can you talk to us about that transition from the CIA? What motivated you to run in politics? Because I assume there are probably some experiences and things that you saw there that said, hey, I need to be a representative. So I began my career as a federal agent, as a law enforcement officer, and then moved to CIA, where I was a case officer. I worked collecting information that was meant to help our president, our military, our diplomats make good and informed decisions about issues of national security. And back in 2014, I decided to leave government service, leave the intelligence world, to move back home to Virginia. I thought I was going to have a kind of relatively quiet life in the private sector, but that did not last long. I decided to run for Congress in 2017, and really what motivated me was the time that I had spent answering tough questions. My whole job as an intelligence officer was to help answer some of the biggest questions facing our country so that lawmakers and diplomats and service members and the president, that folks were making good decisions informed by quality intelligence. And looking at Capitol Hill, it sometimes felt, at least as you know, someone who was disengaged or not a member of Congress, that sometimes decisions were just made for political reasons and without all of the facts and information and data that I had always worked so hard to try and, you know, push back to CIA headquarters. And so I said, you know, I want to be a part of changing what I think needs to be changed and making sure that people are making good, informed decisions that impact lives across certainly Virginia's 7th District, the larger Commonwealth in our country.
Your experience also inspired your bill that's also now law. That's the Securing America's Borders Against Fentanyl Act.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how that's going to save local families from drug overdose deaths.
So what we know right now is that we have ever-increasing numbers of overdose deaths, and many of them can be attributed to fentanyl-laced drugs. The potency of fentanyl is extreme, and people are dying across our communities. And so I have been hearing directly from law enforcement entities, from families, from constituents who have been impacted, have lost a loved one to a fentanyl overdose. And what we know is that fentanyl is also, because it is so potent, it is very hard to detect it, as the way that, at the border, at ports of entry, some of the older detection means are good for large quantities of cocaine or large quantities of other drugs that might be brought across the border. But the potency of fentanyl does put it kind of in a separate category where we know that far more is getting through. And so this legislation is pretty straightforward. DHS needs more resources. They absolutely need to do research into how it is that the mechanisms that drug traffickers are using to traffic drugs across the border have changed. Their concealment methods have changed, particularly when it pertains to this very, very deadly drug that is so potent that can be trafficked in much smaller quantities, pushing money back into the pockets of these transnational criminal organizations. How can we ensure that at our points of entry, which is where the vast majority of these drugs are flowing through, are those who are tasked with the jobs of interdicting have every type of technology and every type of resource available them to be able to stop the flow of fentanyl across our borders and into our communities.
All right, Representative Spanberger, thank you so much for joining us in the studio and for being on the program this week.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and we'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching Capitol Review.